Welcome to this video, which is about this video. This video, of course, being about the video that you're watching now, and is concerned with the subject matter of this video. This might seem disorienting, but it's actually perfectly straightforward. A video about recursion has to be about itself, or at least reference its own existence. The 1969 Pink Floyd album, Ummagumma, depicts the members of the band by a doorway, with a painting on the wall, which depicts the members of the band by a doorway, next to a painting on the wall, which shows the members of the band by a doorway, and so on and so on. This 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, when completed, depicts the box of the jigsaw puzzle itself. My city contains what is perhaps the best plaque ever created, Toronto's Recursive History Project of Toronto's Recursive History. It reads, "This plaque was commemorated on October 10th, 2018, to commemorate its own commemoration." Plaques like this one are an integral part of the campaign to support more plaques like this one. By reading this plaque, you have made a valuable addition to the number of people who have read this plaque. To this day, and up until the end of this sentence, this plaque continues to be read by people like yourself. The programming textbook for the language C has an entry in the index for recursion. It's referenced on a few pages, including the page of the index itself that you're reading, looping you back to the same definition. The Wikipedia page for web page used to show an example image of a web page, which was a screenshot of a web browser displaying the Wikipedia page itself, which contains the screenshot of the same web page, and so on. Even natural terrain can be recursive. Islands can contain lakes. Islands can exist in lakes on islands. Islands can exist in lakes on islands in lakes, and so on. There's also a lake in Finland, coincidentally shaped a lot like Finland itself. This guy is giving himself a tattoo on his thigh, which is a line drawing of him giving himself a tattoo on his thigh, which is a line drawing of him giving himself a tattoo on his thigh. The recursive centaur, half horse, half recursive centaur. This Twitter user repeatedly screenshotted previous tweets with the caption, "Day X of attempting to capture the essence of the abyss through a digital medium," creating a tunnel structure of the tweets referencing themselves. This bit had been done already by the YouTuber Jax Films with his famous Twitter for Android saga. Over the course of a year, he repeatedly tweeted screenshots of tweets over and over again, including the Twitter for Android message below the tweet, resulting in a very deep tunnel structure. His plan all along was to eventually turn it into a song, which he did. MC Escher's piece Print Gallery shows a man in a gallery looking at a painting of a city, which spirals into itself until it loops back into a similar version of the original gallery. These visual examples of recursion are known as the Drost effect, where a picture appears within itself, creating a loop that goes on forever. This name originates from the Dutch brand of cocoa, Drost. The logo incorporates this effect with a woman holding a tray with a mug and a tin of Drost cocoa, which in turn has the logo with the same woman holding a tray, and so on. This effect was pretty popular in product logos for a while, including Royal Baking Powder. The Laughing Cow cheese logo incorporates it too, with a red cow wearing earrings that have the Laughing Cow cheese packages dangling off of them, with the same cow and smaller earrings, and so on.
I think about forever I get upset. Like the Land O'Lakes butter has that Indian girl sitting holding a box, and it has a picture of her on it holding a box, with a picture of her on it holding a box. Have you ever noticed that?
This is a piece by Charles Addams, the cartoonist responsible for creating the Addams Family. It depicts a man getting a haircut at a barbershop. He sits in front of a mirror, with another mirror positioned on the opposite wall behind him. This causes the reflection to reflect itself, creating a loop of images of him sitting next to his barber. You've probably encountered this phenomenon yourself at some point, finding yourself in a room where two mirrors happen to be arranged in such a way that the reflection reflects itself. It made an appearance in the classic film Citizen Kane, with the famous Hall of Mirrors scene. The artist Yayoi Kusama made use of it in her Infinity Mirrors exhibit, which uses mirrors, balls, and LEDs to create a kaleidoscopic environment that creates a profound sense of the infinite. If you've ever used the software OBS, you've likely encountered this too. When you set the source to your monitor, where the program itself is open, you get another repeating pattern. The software is recording the software recording the software, infinitely. The video game The Stanley Parable has some recursion right in the main menu screen. There's a desk with a computer monitor, which displays the same main menu screen you're looking at. This is an interesting one, because it also works in the other direction. You, the player, in the real world, are sitting at your desk, looking at a computer monitor as well, sliding into that recursive loop yourself. Recursion doesn't have to be entirely visual either. Here's an example from television. The Gilmore Girls' Sopranos paradox. In Season 6, Episode 4 of The Sopranos, an episode of Gilmore Girls is playing on TV. These shows happen to air at the same time. And in Season 7, Episode 17 of Gilmore Girls, the character Lorelai makes a joke about Richard's tracksuit, asking if he's having lunch with Tony Soprano.
Hi, Dad. Nice threads. You having lunch with Tony Soprano?
Don't encourage him.
Yeah, you like it?
This has some startling implications. Both The Sopranos and Gilmore Girls exist as a television show in each other's respective universe. But it also means that each show has a version of itself within its own universe. When Gilmore Girls plays in The Sopranos universe, Tony might witness a direct reference to himself. There's an infinite repetition of each show's universe referencing each other. Last year, I read the postmodern novel If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. The structure of the book itself is recursive, where the narrative follows the reader, you, attempting to read a book called If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. It's written in the second person, so the protagonist is you, trying to read the book that you're reading. Chapter to chapter, the reader reads a brief story in a book that they find that ends abruptly. This sort of self-reflexive structure has appeared in a few other books too, like Lost in the Funhouse by John Barth, which often calls attention to its own storytelling and the writing of the book itself. In Part 2 of Don Quixote by Cervantes, the characters in the story have read Part 1. Part 1 exists as a book in the story itself. The film adaptation written by Charlie Kaufman is a film about the writing of the film itself. It was originally supposed to be an adaptation of the book The Orchid Thief, but it turned into a script about him, Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter, struggling to adapt the book into the movie you're watching. In the story, Charlie also has a fictional twin brother who represents cliché, basic Hollywood storytelling. So Charlie Kaufman is here trying to write a thoughtful, slow, meditative work, and is competing against his alter ego, who's hijacking the script of the movie itself and turning it into a bombastic, formulaic thriller. All of this manifests not only in the whims of these characters, but also in the actual movie itself, as it begins to incorporate thriller elements. It all loops in on itself. Reality and fiction are blurred together. The film is recursive. At this point, you've probably come to an intuitive understanding of what recursion is. All these examples seem to have some kind of structural similarity to them. The same sort of thing is happening. But how do we define it? Well, here's a classic dictionary definition. Recursion. See recursion. Unfortunately, that's a bit too clever to be useful. How about this one? Recursion. If you still don't get it, see recursion. Well, at least with this one, we can break out of the loop if we manage to understand it, but we aren't quite there yet. It's just being clever in a more complicated way. Here's something more concrete and computer science-y. A recursive definition is formally understood as a system that refers to itself in its own definition. Steven Pinker put it in a broader way, saying it's a procedure that calls itself, a constituent that contains a constituent of the same kind. The second part is key here, since it doesn't need to contain the exact same thing, but something of the same kind, self-similar embedding. Fractals are a pretty spectacular way to visualize this sort of self-similar embedding. The most famous example is the Mandelbrot set, the result of iterating on a particular mathematical formula. That self-similarity, at multiple levels, results in amazing complexity in the geometry. And the most dizzying aspect is that whether you zoom in or you zoom out, you eventually find yourself right where you started. The whole looks like a part, which looks like a smaller part, and so on. A more basic example of a fractal is Cantor's set, which you get from recursively taking out the middle third of a line segment over and over. Or the Koch snowflake. Here, you start with an equilateral triangle, and on each side, you substitute two pieces longer than the original. And then on those sides, you substitute two pieces longer than the original piece. You keep doing this over and over, and if you iterate on this infinitely many times, you get a perimeter that is infinitely long. The Apollonian gasket is the result of recursively inserting circles into themselves. The Sierpinski triangle follows the same procedure, but with triangles, creating an infinitely looping triforce. This fractal pattern of self-similarity mysteriously appears quite a lot in nature, like the branches of trees, a stalk of broccoli, or the arteries that move blood through our bodies. Recursion is about nesting a thing in another structurally similar thing. Stories within stories, movies within movies, paintings within paintings, Russian dolls inside Russian dolls, parentheses inside parentheses. Douglas Hofstadter goes deep on recursion in his terrific book Gödel Escher Bach, as well as I Am a Strange Loop. I would highly recommend these books to anyone interested in anything I've said in this video so far. He also developed Hofstadter's law. It always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. This is a recursive definition, since Hofstadter's law is referenced within the law itself. It also definitely applied to the production of this video. There I go again, referencing the video itself in the video you're watching. Wait, I just did it again. Hofstadter would call this more of a strange loop, which is a related concept, but for the purposes of this video, I've referred to all of these sorts of structures as recursion, including instances of mere self-reference. A recursive definition, when properly formulated, never leads to an infinite regress. There must always be a way to break out of the loop. The most formal instances of recursion can be found in mathematics. Consider factorials. These are fun because they're expressed with an exclamation point, which makes them seem very intense, like they're being shouted. 3! Or 3 factorial is equal to 3 times 2 times 1. 4 factorial is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. We can express all factorials formally with a recursive definition. 0 factorial is 1, that's the base case to break out of the loop. And n factorial is n times n minus 1 factorial, where n is greater than 0. This is recursive, since factorials are expressed in terms of other factorials. The Fibonacci sequence is another recursively defined sequence, and it also mysteriously appears in the natural world, finding its way into the arrangement of leaves on a stem, the branching of trees, and the number of petals on daisies. It also appeared in loads of paintings. The time signature and lyrics of the song Lateralis by Tool also follow the Fibonacci sequence, a fact that has been blowing stoner minds for years. Here's the definition. Fibonacci of 0 is 0. Fibonacci of 1 is 1. Those are the base cases to break out of the loop. And from there, Fibonacci of n is Fibonacci of n minus 1 plus Fibonacci of n minus 2. This results in a sequence that goes 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Each instance of Fibonacci, beyond the first two, is calculated by calculating the Fibonacci of the previous two instances. Recursion even finds its way into basic counting. Here's a common way to express all natural numbers. 1 is in n. If x is in n, then x plus 1 is in n. This is a logically sound way of expressing every number, even though there are infinitely many natural numbers. This definition is recursive, since n is contained in its own definition. This structure is more important than you might think. Loads of different animals have the capacity to count, at least being able to tell the difference between different quantities of objects, or labeling different numbers of objects. But because of recursion, humans can count to any number. Whatever number we have, we know that we can always increase it by 1 to get a bigger number. Recursion has allowed us to grasp infinity. All this stuff is pretty trippy and cool, but the structure of recursion goes even deeper. When I was a little kid trying to fall asleep one night, I remember getting lost in thought and recognizing that was happening. I realized that I could think about the fact that I was thinking. Then, I noticed I was thinking about doing that. This quickly collapsed into thinking about 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 thinking. It was recursive. In my naive youth, I had unknowingly just tapped into one of the most important structures that underlies our cognition and relation to the world. Descartes happened to do the same thing about 400 years earlier with I think therefore I am. I just came to it independently and didn't write a whole treatise about it.
I thought of that. Turned out it already existed, but I arrived at it independently.
Through his philosophical system of rigorous doubt, doubting everything he possibly could, including his own existence, he realized that he was doubting in the first place. If there's doubting happening, he figured that there must be one who doubts. For there to be doubting, you need a doubter. So he concludes that he does in fact exist. This must have been a major load off his mind, and great news for his friends. The crucial point here is that he wasn't just thinking, he was thinking about thinking. Recursion was central in the development of the sense of self. In his book, The Recursive Mind, the psychologist Michael Corballis makes the case that recursion is the backbone of our memory, our storytelling, our social life, and even our language. It's the central advantage that brought us to the point where we could dominate the world with intellect and ingenuity. It made us omnipotent. How does a trippy looping structure do that? Well, let's start with language. Language, as it's usually understood, is rumored to be uniquely human. For Noam Chomsky, one of the most distinguishing features of human language is actually recursion. It's what separates our capacity for language from non-human animal communication. We've transcended simple calls and gestures. We can embed structures within structures to create sentences that can express a limitless set of possible meanings. Consider the famous children's story, The House That Jack Built. This is the house that Jack built. This is the malt that lay in the house that Jack built. This is the rat that ate the malt that lay in the house that Jack built. This is the cat that killed the rat that ate the malt that lay in the house that Jack built. Children quickly pick up on the fact that this sequence can be extended forever, adding more and more phrases that increase the complexity of the sentence. This is known as generativity. It allows us to construct sentences we've never used before, or understand sentences we've never heard before. That's the beauty of human language. We can express whatever thoughts we like, with whatever level of complexity is required. There truly is no bound, beyond running out of breath, or running out of ink in your pen. We can even create sentences that don't have any semantic meaning, like Noam Chomsky's famous example, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. This doesn't map onto anything that can exist in the real world, or any situation that can take place. It's grammatically correct, but it's meaningless. It's just structure. Here's another pretty funny example. In 1934, the mathematician and philosopher Alfred North Whitehead was at a dinner table next to the psychologist B.F. Skinner. Skinner was a behaviorist who figured that every aspect of the human mind could be accounted for with the principles of conditioning. He was yapping about how this is going to change the face of psychology forever, and that even language and the construction of sentences can be explained as conditioned behavior. Whitehead smugly challenged this view, saying, "No black scorpion is falling upon this table." And then he asked Skinner how conditioning led him to say that. This generative property of language is recursive. For example, I can tell you, this sentence is a sentence, which is true. It is a sentence. That would mean that I could also say, this sentence is a sentence is a sentence, and so on and so on. Obviously, all human languages are pretty different. If I wanted to learn Mandarin or Spanish, I'd have to spend ages studying the vocabulary, the grammar, and the pronunciation. But for Noam Chomsky, all human language is based on a deeper set of rules that apply to all languages, a universal grammar.
We have somehow in our heads a procedure for constructing an infinite array of structured expressions, each of which is assigned a sound and assigned a semantic interpretation. Furthermore, these structured expressions have the property of what's called digital infinity. And by that time, say late 40s, the mathematics of it were well understood. The theory of computation had been developed, theory of recursive functions. You have this system of digital infinity. It's a procedure of some sort that generates an infinity of structured expressions. That's a generative grammar, in fact, that's all it is.
Language, at its most fundamental level, always involves merging entities together. You take one word and combine it with another word. Like and button combine together to create like button. This process can apply recursively. Words combine together to create phrases, which can then be merged to create sentences. Click the like button next to the subscribe button. The tea I made, which is made with mint, tastes pretty good. In order to understand a recursive structure in language, we have to have a functioning working memory. If one phrase is embedded in another, we need to remember where we were before the embedding to pick back up when we jump back out to the rest of the sentence. So memory is involved with recursion in that way, but it goes deeper. One of the most sophisticated things we do as humans is mentally time travel. We can envision ourselves in the past and in the future, a process known as autonoetic consciousness. This is obviously pretty useful because we can think back to past experiences and fine-tune our actions in case we encounter a similar event in the future. The last time I touched that stovetop element, I burned my hand. I better not do that again. Imagining what might happen to us in the future is great too. We might envision ourselves falling to our death if we step off a cliff, so we tread carefully to make sure that doesn't happen. There's also good reason to believe that remembering the past and imagining the future are basically the result of the same mechanism. Cognitive psychologists have done a number of studies showing that memory is essentially a reconstructive process. When we mentally time travel, we're generating ourselves a story of what happened to us, in much the same way we generate a story of what might happen in the future, or generate something that's entirely fictional. This system of mental time travel has a recursive property. I might remember that yesterday I had made plans to get lunch with my friend. I'm reflecting on a previous episode of my experience, which itself was a projection of my experience into the future. Our understanding of time and our ability to understand ourselves moving through it is so central to the way we act and exist in the world. We always have a clock sitting in the corner of our computer screen or on our phone. We keep track of appointments, deadlines, and birthdays in our calendar. We measure everything in seconds, minutes, hours, days of the week, months, years, centuries, millennia. Each of these categories is embedded into a self-similar larger one. Another exceptional thing we do as humans is reading each other's minds, and I don't mean this in a psychic or supernatural way. We're constantly making fairly accurate guesses about what other people are thinking about. This is known as theory of mind. We can read people's emotions, deducing when someone is scared, angry, sad, surprised, disgusted, happy, and so on. This is usually pretty easy for us if we're paying attention to facial expressions or behavior. We can look at someone feeling sad and project ourselves into that subjectivity, imagining what they might be experiencing with that emotion. We can empathize. We can also understand what someone else can see. This seems fairly basic, but it does require us to mentally rotate and transform our own visual scene to match the other person's perspective. If you're talking to someone face to face, you know that they can see you and what's behind you, even though you yourself can't see that. We can also guess what someone else might be thinking about. If you see someone staring at a delicious donut, rubbing their belly and licking their lips, you could probably deduce that they're thinking about eating the donut. All of these processes are fundamentally recursive. I can know what you're thinking about, and you might know that I know what you're thinking about. And I might know that you know that I know what you're thinking about, and so on and so on.
They don't know that we know they know we know.
The philosopher Daniel Dennett suggested that we treat people as having intentional states. We know that people have things they want to do. They have beliefs, desires, fears, and hopes. This is a recursive process and operates in a series of levels. First-order intentionality involves one subjective aspect. Alice wants Fred to go away. Second order adds another subjective aspect. Ted thinks Alice wants Fred to go away. This can balloon out as far as we want. Ted suspects that Alice believes that he does indeed suspect that Fred thinks that she wants him to go away. That's fifth-order intentionality. The complex social dynamics we deal with as humans require us to unpack these layers of recursive subjectivities. You meet someone at a birthday party, and you figure they probably know the host, or they know someone who knows the host. They figure the same about you, since you're also at the party. You each also know that you know that about each other. There's an assumed knowledge of all of this, because you've both found yourself at the same birthday party. So how do you know Paul, you ask? An ordinary question that depends on layers of nested recursive subjectivities. Maybe that person doesn't know Paul, though, and instead some looping social dynamics brought her to that party instead. Maybe Paul works with Charlie, and Charlie was roommates with Martin in college. Martin's brother is currently dating Alice, who invited this person along to the party with her. It was still fair to assume that this person knew Paul, though, and she recognized that was the case, since she was at his birthday party, so she didn't take offense to the question. She's just Paul's coworker's former roommate's brother's girlfriend's friend, which makes her sort of Paul's friend, so she showed up to his birthday. She knew that he either knew Paul or had a similar chain of relationships leading him to be there, and that he thought the same about her, leading to this very conversation. We're constantly navigating through these webs of recursive relationships. In any large enough social dynamic, it becomes important to pay attention to who thinks what of whom. In order to be the gregarious social creatures that we are as humans, we need the structure of recursion. So recursion is pretty cool. It's pretty mind-blowing to me how this cute little trippy structure has managed to find its way into art, culture, mathematics, language, and even our own cognition, to the point that it might be one of the most important revolutions in the structure of our thinking. This video has been what it has been. Videos like this one are an integral part of the campaign to support more videos like this one. By watching this video, you have made a valuable addition to the amount of people who have seen this video. To this day, and up until the end of this sentence, this video continues to be watched by people like yourself.